people are entitled to express themselves, but I think they might need to go through the law and get a permit to sell something.
It's already a tough trade, it's very competitive. Being that it's part of the arts, it's a hard marketplace. Why make it harder for them?
I think it's hard enough to make a living without having to go through all this real bureaucratic red tape.
Welcome back to New York Issues Plus. Well, New York has always had aspirations to be the cultural capital of the world, but now it appears there are some limits to its efforts to cultivate the arts. A number of artists in Manhattan's SoHo neighborhood have broken the law by selling their art on the street. New Yorkers are allowed to sell written material without a city permit, but people who sell paintings, drawings, and other works of art are not. City officials and local business people say the artists add to the congestion on already busy sidewalks and pose other safety problems. Since 1993, the police have been cracking down, arresting artists without permits. Joining us to discuss the issue are Robert Lederman. He is president of a 200-member group that calls itself Artist, an acronym for Artists' Response to Illegal State Tactics, and Catherine Freed, a Democratic City Councilwoman from Lower Manhattan, which includes SoHo. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Robert Lederman, first of all, you have evidently been arrested 13 times, and you have a First Amendment case in appeals court, which is connected with all of these arrests.
Yes.
What have you been accused of doing?
Well, when artists, including myself, are arrested, they're usually charged with not having a vending license. The interesting thing about that is, number one, there are no vending licenses available, which the city freely admits in the federal suit.
Now, why is this? Because there's been a license freeze, or what's going on with the vending licenses?
They put an arbitrary cap of 853 on the number of licenses that they can issue.
So even if you wanted one, you can't get one right now.
You can't even get an application for one. They refuse to give them out. Secondly, First Amendment activities are not allowed to be required to have a license. So, for example, in New York City, you can sell books, newspapers, postcards, even baseball cards on most city streets without a license. So since the Supreme Court and many other courts in this country for years have recognized that visual art is protected by the First Amendment, there's no reason to require a license in the first place. And as a result, although the city's arrested 350 artists, they haven't brought a single artist to trial or found anyone guilty. The artwork is confiscated, but the cases are in every instance dismissed.
Catherine Freed?
Sure.
You disagree with it, I take it?
Well, no, not entirely. In fact, I agree that art should be protected, but what I have a problem with is the right to sell art. We're not really talking about any kind of coercion on the type of art they do or anything like that. We're really talking about the right to sell and the right to sell on city sidewalks. For instance, in SoHo, for years, there have been controls because there are so many crowds. Long before it became an issue with the artists, general vending was restricted from those streets because we simply don't have enough room. It's very much a tourist mecca. And a lot of people, artists usually who live in the buildings in SoHo, at one point could not get into or out of their lofts because there were so many vendors. They'd find people changing clothes in their foyers, using them as bathrooms. There was a real problem. So we had gotten restrictions against general vending. But to get to the whole question about this, what it really comes down to is a question of rationality. Because it's a question of how much room we have on the sidewalks and how many people can use them, and are they there specifically for pedestrians? Or are they going to be for certain artists, because not all artists can display their art on sidewalks because they're huge. And what kind of controls do we have? And if you allow 10 artists to do it, then don't you need some kind of, 10 artists may not be a problem, but I guarantee you 10,000 will be, because we can't just open it up. And for me, it's very ironic that Mr. Lederman has kind of vilified me in all of this, but I originally became involved in the whole question because I had gotten called that artists were being arrested and their art was confiscated, and I thought that was terrible. In fact, I even got the DA's office to back off on all of this, and we had a hearing at the City Council. I wanted to put forward a bill that would have created certain areas for artists, craftspersons, where they could go in and they would have to get a license, and the only question of the license would be if it was some kind of creativity that we don't want glitter socks or whatever, but that if it's something that took creativity to produce, then we would set up areas throughout the city. And in fact, I even proposed one in SoHo and Houston between Broadway and Houston and Broadway, where there's a city-owned lot, we could put artists. However, the problem that we ran into, particularly in Mr. Lederman's part, was he said, you can't ghettoized artists. We want to be anywhere, anytime, any way we want to.
All right.
And quite frankly, that doesn't work in the city.
Let me respond to a few
Yes,
of those things.
respond, but I just want to clear one thing up. In fact, there is a New York City law, is this correct, that for visual arts that says that unless you have a license to sell, you cannot sell. There's an agreement there, is that right?
It's not just on visual arts.
On the
There is
contrary.
there's a general vending license that's required for anyone who wants to vend on the
Right,
streets of
but
New
it
York.
applies to
Yes.
visual arts, and
Right.
there's a constitutional debate going on here, where you're saying
Right.
that a visual art is protected under free speech, and so that's one of the areas that you're fighting. But you've also accused Catherine Freed of being behind this police crackdown and the arrests as well.
Let me respond to that.
So please respond.
First of all, it's not myself that's originating these accusations. Numerous police officials, police captains, people in the district attorney's office, even Catherine Freed's own spokesman at her office on Chambers Street readily admits that she routinely pressures the police in the first precinct
sorry, that's
to make
really
these arrests.
inaccurate.
All right,
It's
but okay,
totally
you say it's inaccurate, but
The
you know
New York
that.
Times, in an article that came out a few weeks ago, said the councilwoman, referring to Ms. Freed, is seeking to overturn constitutional protections for visual art.
No,
Which
that's
I'm not,
being
by the
fought
way, because
in the courts,
and
correct?
let me just correct something. The article was
That's the New
totally
York
wrong.
Times.
Yes, and they were totally wrong. And I am
They're
not a
not
plaintiff.
always right, but at any rate.
Yes, and
this
I'm
case,
not a
they are
plaintiff,
right.
and I'm not even a plaintiff in the lawsuit, which they said that I am, and I'm not.
But you know, let me just say,
deal
the
with a
important
fundamental
issue, but
part of
the
something
important
she
issue
brought
really
up.
is, aside from what's going on
Correct.
here.
The fundamental issue is that in the same way that the Wall Street Journal is protected by the First Amendment when it's being printed, it's equally protected by the First Amendment when it's being sold. Selling it in no way takes away its First Amendment protection.
Right, and this is what you're fighting. The city court ruled against you, and now you have it in a federal appeals court where that constitutional issue is going to be discussed. But in the meantime, the practical, application of these laws is you have constituents from SoHo, for instance, business people who have complained that there were too many artists and that there was a safety hazard or whatever.
There
that,
is no safety hazard.
All right.
On the busiest
Well, except
day,
for people
there
walking
are
in the
less,
streets with children, of
on the
course.
busiest day, on a summer day, a Saturday in SoHo, there are less than 30 artists in the entire area.
But what happens if
displaying
it's
their art.
opened up?
Sure, if you open it up,
could that
then
be
we
a
may-
problem?
Before
300.
1993, the police department had a policy, and I can prove this because they gave letters to artists, that an artist is protected by the First Amendment, doesn't need a license to sell their work on the street. This is before 93. At that time, there were exactly the same number of artists on the street as there are today. There was no congestion problem from artists then. There is none now.
All right.
However, the reason that's inaccurate, by the way, is we already had regulations in SoHo against any kind of general vending. It had been there for years, based on the fact that there are so many pedestrians walking up and down West Broadway.
All right.
That was put in long before the artist
These are
issue ever
pedestrians.
came
It's not
up.
street
All right,
artists.
so
that
just
you're
quickly,
talking
we've got about 30 seconds
Right.
each.
Sure.
Compromise. How can artists
I
be
would like
allowed
to
to
go
display
forward-
and sell on the
Sure.
street without
I would like to go
interfering
forward with my original bill, which basically would go around and find areas where they could just, where they could set up and vend basically for free. All they'd have to show is that it took some kind of creativity to produce whatever it is they produce.
So you want designated areas for artists to display and sell?
Which is what most other cities do, which
All
is
right.
exactly where the
Robert
idea
Lederman?
came from.
Catherine Freed represents
But
certain
you're
real
compromised.
estate interests.
That's a
that
lie.
want to
I'm
eliminate
sorry.
the
I
right
really
of free
object to
speech
that.
on public
But
property.
what do you want to have?
What I
happen?
want
does
is
these
for the
personal
courts to
attacks.
affirm the right of artists under the First Amendment to use public property, the city's streets and parks, to express their point of view,
All right, well,
which they
noted
do
in
by
that.
showing art.
Catherine
Right.
Freed, Robert
Thank you.
Lederman, thank you very much. Let's see what
Thank you.
happens with this. And when we return, should the Big Apple bid for the Olympics? Stay with us.